Hello everyone and welcome to the Planning Game Podcast, your weekly podcast for real-world planning solutions to real-world planning problems. My name's John McDermott from Town Planning Expert. Let's get right into it. So on this episode of the Planning Game, I'm going to be flying solo, as it were, and talking a little bit about serviced accommodation. Now, for those of you who know me personally, you know that serviced accommodation, or SA, is one of my least favourite of the development types, and there's a reason for that. But we'll get right into that as we go through. Now, this accompanies planning an Anti-Guru video that I've produced on SA that you'll find on YouTube and Facebook, and a article that I wrote on SA for YPN. So bear with me. So it's now April 2020 at the time of recording this, and SA is back in the headlines. It's back in the headlines because we absolutely need it right now. We need it to house our NHS workers, our key workers, etc., and those who are self-isolating. But back in 2019, it was also an issue. Labour, when they were trying to get in, and it's a good thing they didn't, but let's face it, they tried, made it an issue by proposing two different use classes for it. It's Class C5 for second homes and Class C6 for furnished holiday lettings. Now, they would have required planning permission if Labour had got in, but since then other things have taken over and things have accelerated in the SA world. Now, it's a common question I get asked is, what use class is serviced accommodation? Happily now, I have a piece of case law that I can refer to. Now, this is what we call the Cambridge cases. Now, the Cambridge cases trying to classify serviced accommodation as off the back of two enforcement decisions. Planning enforcement is where things have gone wrong, and these decisions tried to classify SA in the sui generis type. Sui generis means to himself, to themselves, to ourselves, and describes a use that doesn't easily fall into a particular use class. And in reality, SA pretty much makes that up. It's often a case of what is it? In those appeal decisions, the inspector said, from the submissions, it's clear that there's a tremendous range of lets in terms of length of stay that have occurred since the business commenced. Having considered all of the submissions, I accept that in certain circumstances, the longer lets, say up to 60 or 89 days, can, as a matter of fact and degree, start to become indistinguishable in terms of the character of usage from a 6-month AST. The pattern of usage of a person or couple occupying a flat for, say, 2 or 3 months, in some cases, may hardly be different. At the other end of the scale, however, that there is a significant difference in the character of usage for 1 or 2 nights a week. Having considered these extremes, the inspector took the view that SA was a sui generis use and the council were right to enforce. Now, serviced accommodation itself is an Americanism. It's been brought to our vocabulary. It normally is a fully furnished apartment, house, or single room within a house that's available for short-term or long-term stay, importantly providing hotel-style amenities such as room service, housekeeping, or a fitness centre, laundry room, rec room, etc. And many are equipped with kitchens, Wi-Fi, and other things. Companies frequently use SA to host professionals who may be on a local or international work assignment. Serviced accommodation units offer facilities much like a hotel. but with more space, convenience, and privacy. And don't get me wrong, there is a market for this. There is absolutely a market for this. Before the US model came across, we had three distinct forms of SA in the UK: traditional hotels, guest houses and boarding houses, apart hotels, and holiday lets. However, SA has become a buzzword for high cash flow, low management cost development, and it has become popular by new developers, new investors to get into this market, and the lines have been blurred. So we do have some control in the UK. In the 32 London boroughs, we have the provisions of the Greater London Council General Powers Act 1973, that hot rocking act. And what that says is that if you're going to provide temporary sleeping accommodation, that amounts to a material change of use, as long as it exceeds 90 days in any particular calendar year. This was reinforced by the Deregulation Act 2015, which provided some exemptions, but in the main, it's a 90-day rule. If you're living in London and thinking about opening your home to guests on Airbnb, then you are subject to the 90-day rule, and Airbnb automatically limits the availability of these entire home listings to 90 days in any calendar year now. Other platforms don't operate the 90-day rule, and in reality, most training courses on SA don't talk about it either. In Wales, SA is controlled by the Welsh Government at their level and consider the material change of use as a unique use, as they call it, from day one. Other authorities in England have some variation. Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole councils consider it sui generis from day one. Southend Borough Council considers it C1 from day one. Hinckley and Bosworth have gone sui gen, as have Portsmouth. The problem we have with SA is that it can fit in a multiple of uses depending how it is operated. And we've tried to provide some semblance of guide as to where it could possibly fit. So SA can be a traditional hotel type use. Hotels, boarding houses, guest houses, where there is no significant provision of care, but this excludes hostels. The difference between one and the other is a hostel typically has a kitchen for residents to then go and make themselves a sandwich or something, whereas hotel rooms don't normally have a kitchen inside the individual room. Travelodge is a classic example of SA. There's no real on-site catering for a Travelodge. You pay for a room for a night, you get a bathroom, you get a kettle, and if you're lucky, you get a vending machine. Halls of residence are also a form of SA, and they fall within Class C1, typically, unless a council has made another judgment. Their ability to sit within C1 all falls back to this single room occupancy idea. Cluster flats are something very different. Residential institutions in C2 can also operate a form of SA. McCarthy and Stone, for example, provide SA for older persons within Class C2, where you're essentially buying a lifetime lease on a home that's under the national standards. C3 dwelling houses can provide some form of SA, but it's getting increasingly difficult to make that stick. C3A, which was the old traditional holiday home style of SA, is starting to fall away given the Cambridge case law. C3B provides for people with learning difficulties or mental health problems, and is also commonly where companies, the corporate let, sits itself. Again, it needs to be supported by a housing scheme by the company to back that form of SA. C3C is for religious groups typically, and for things that fall outside of the HMO definition. So the two persons living together could fall within C3C. HMOs is another common location for a serviced accommodation type use, but again, you have to look at the length of stay and how different is it to the traditional HMO. C4 for small HMOs up to 6 people, large HMOs fall within that ubiquitous sui generis class. Now, to assist in making a judgment here, we've tried to put together some form of checklist as to where individual things fit. So C1 is common for less than a month stay. You don't normally stay in a hotel for more than a month. C2 is where you're providing nursing care. Hostel in sui gen kicks in between a month and 5 months stay because people in hostels typically don't sit on ASTs. C3, A, B, and C are starting to get increasingly difficult, so you're unlikely to live in one of those classes unless the council is very specifically saying that you are. C4, again, this is where ASTs start to kick in rather than the license most service accommodation uses fall under. Provides for C4, more than 6 months stay, no more than 6 people as their primary place of residence. Sui Gen HMO, more than 6 people as their primary place of residence. And then serviced accommodation, when it doesn't fit into anything else, falls into a sui generis type group. Remembering, of course, you can't necessarily move between a sui generis HMO and sui generis SA without planning permission, because the council have to make a judgment as to how different it is. In most cases, the council will often default to the reasonable person test, otherwise known as the Clapham Omnibus test. This is a hypothetical legal test that revolves around a question of what would a reasonable person think. And it's really good practice to judge your SA based on this, because that's what your council is going to do. In most cases, the best offence is a really good defence. Understanding exactly what you're doing and how your SA works is a really good defence to a council erring on the side of caution or going down the Cambridge route. SAs often have a really bad reputation with councils, especially where they have caused harm in the past. Oxford is bringing in its 120-day rule famously because of pop-up brothels, and I'm not joking there. If you Google why is Oxford controlling Airbnb, it's because it was having problems with unscrupulous tenants basically setting up a brothel in a street for a period of 2 weeks. Where you fall in a grey area, don't appear combative or try to game the system. Establish with your council or your friendly neighbourhood planning consultant where you think you lie. Every council is different, so bear that in mind. Now, as part of the government's wider commitment to improve standards, we now have new prescriptions on licensing of HMOs, and we have new definitions. Now, it's estimated that this will bring in about 160,000 properties within the scope of licensing, so understanding it is really important. Again, the best defence to this is a good defence, or the best offence is a good defence. We've got a new definition for mandatory licensing. So the 3-story requirement is out, and it's just a simple more than 5 people. It's occupied by persons living in 2 or more separate households. That's relatively easy for SA to get to. Where you have flats in multiple occupation, the purpose of that is to try and deal with purpose-built flats in much smaller blocks with up to 2 self-contained flats per block, there everything needs a license. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about running SA, and I'm not going to come from my own experience here. I'm going to come from someone's experience who is incredibly knowledgeable, and that's Kerry McEwen of Matrix Consultancy. Now, Kerry is an SA operator who operates SA within Hereford. Running serviced accommodation should not be taken lightly. It's labour intensive but can be very rewarding, and you have to ensure that each property is fully furnished and equipped for your guests, and those guests can be of any age. Now that's really quite important, isn't it? Because that's not putting you first, that's putting your guests first. For a start, it's good to know your figures and demand in your area. You're going to be responsible for the bills, and if you've done rent to SA, you're going to be guaranteeing a rent. So you need to know what your nightly rate is going to be, and bear in mind that rate changes depending on the time of year. It's a good idea to start off with low rates rather than high, and work from there. After the first month increase, work out what loss of occupancy you've had. Have a great relationship with a couple of local cleaners or householder companies. You need to keep the standard of your accommodation really high. The same applies to a maintenance team who are reliable and can be called on 24/7. Remember, this is an active management use, not something that you can just sit on passively. Guest communication is vitally important at the start of your relationship with a guest and at the end. If you get an inquiry for your property, you want to be replying as soon as possible, or they will go elsewhere. Most portals will monitor your response rate on the guest too. The aim of the guest is to have a home and a home experience, and in turn leave you a positive review on booking portals. You really do live and die by their reviews, and that's where it comes back to the point I made on the Anti-Guru. It's very much about your guest first and last. Their safety, their security, their happiness is important. It's not about the money, it's about the guest. So I'm going to leave you with some concluding thoughts. The disparity in council behaviour towards SA and the recent decision of the Inspectorate to dump it into the sui generis class indicates that there is a need for government to provide guidance on this precise point of law. We can't just rely upon the market to carry out an adjustment. That's not enough anymore, as a new Americanism will just take its place. And whilst I'm there, what is co-living anyway? I'll see you guys next time on the game.